Megan?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Digital Hammurabi. I'm sorry, we are slightly later than originally intended. Twins did not want to take their naps this morning, but we pushed through, we got here, and our guest today has been very gracious in waiting for me. This is Eli Tadmor. Eli is going to talk to us about plague and the error epic in the ancient world. So Eli, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Of course, would you mind introducing yourself
Yeah.
and telling us how you got into the field?
Yes, my name's Eli Tadmor. I got into the field because my grandfather was an Assyriologist, and he introduced me to it. I was a bit small, so I'm not sure how much of it I got, but he was such a fantastic teacher that he kind of hooked me on it for life, I think.
That's amazing. I ask this question to everyone I interview, and I think this is the very first time I've had an actual family connection. It's the family business. Of course I would be an Assyriologist. What else would I do?
Of course,
that's wonderful.
My father is the black sheep of the family. He became a lawyer. But, everyone has faults.
Indeed. We can't hold that against him. My father is also or was when he was still working, he was in law as well. So we love them anyway, even if they choose things other than Assyriology.
Yes, strange people.
Oh, very strange, but never mind. So we're talking about plagues and that kind of thing in the ancient world. When we are looking at this, what kinds of evidence do we have to work with?
Yeah, so we have several kinds of things. It depends on which period you're talking about. I'm going to talk specifically about 2 periods, or even 3, from which we have diverse evidence. The first thing I'm going to talk about are the plague players of King Moshili, from the Hittite king. And, well, he has prayers that we will talk about, in which he despairs about the plague never ending, apparently, and he just is trying to find any way whatsoever to make it stop.
I think we can all relate to that right now.
Yes, we can definitely relate to that. The ancient world can be extremely relatable. The other treasure trove of sources that I'm going to talk about are the Mari letters that come from the city of Mari in what is today Syria, on the Euphrates, from what's called the Old Babylonian period, which is about 2000 to 1600 BC, give or take. And what's amazing about the Mari letters is that it's a period of time where many more people than usual knew to read and write. So we have letters from everyone, and they document daily life, and they tell the stories of kings and commoners and slaves, and one lion that's being transported, and then the lion's sick. Yeah, he asked for a lion at some point. We have a big string of letters from someone asked to transport like a sick lion. And it's kind of amusing. They could write a little play about that. So I will talk about that. And we also have prayers, for instance, in which plague is mentioned, royal inscriptions in which people talk about that. But I think the letters may be the most illuminating and the most relatable.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, let's kind of get into that then. How did people react to these plagues, and how did they try and deal with them?
Yeah, so I have to begin that whenever you deal with the ancient world, you have to answer most of the time, we don't know. We do not have abundant documentation of plague from various times, but I think the Mari letters are a good place to talk about it. So a long time ago in a land far away. Yeah, land far away, there was a very sick woman, and we have a letter from the king, from Zimrilim, to his wife Shiptu. And he says there's this woman that's sick in the palace, but she's sick with something called simum. We don't know exactly what it is. It could be fever. It's obviously infectious. And he's saying she's surrounding herself with all of these women, and it's horrible. Please make her stop. make sure that no one sits in her chair, sleeps in her bed, drinks from her cup. Get her away. This is really infectious, please. So this is one way, which is quarantine. And in Mari, we have quite a bit of evidence from quarantine. We have another letter of a woman that's been sequestered. And we have this really fun letter. Fun. It's fun for modern researchers, not fun for them. Where basically says there's a woman who's sick, and it says you can't treat her yet, but when her extispicy, that is to say the reading of animals' entrails, is negative in her case, we can treat her. So it's like a negative test. And he says whether this woman lives or dies, many other women could die. Let just this woman die, kind of. Actually, the Akkadian does not say that. The Akkadians say, may this woman die, so she won't infect anyone else. They did definitely know disease was infectious. This plague was infectious. We have a letter from an emissary or an official of the king who says, I'm going through this area and there are cities that are sick. In Akkadian, it means touched, like touched with the plague. And please make sure that no one from infected cities goes to healthy cities and vice versa, or else the whole of the land will be overrun with plague. And we have several more pieces of evidence that people at Mari definitely knew the basic mechanism whereby plague spreads. Their explanation for it was a bit different. They thought of it as the rage of the god, not quite viruses, but then again, they wouldn't know. They can be forgiven for that.
Bit difficult to detect those without microscopes.
Slightly, yes, but they thought about it as the punishment of the god. And interestingly, they seem to, when the plague stopped, they would say that the god has rested, that the wrath of the god has abated. And apparently they would, according to one researcher I read and according to some letters, when there was a plague, they would leave the sick and the dead behind and they would flee to the mountains. That's what you do in Mesopotamia, in some parts of Mesopotamia. Whenever something is wrong, you flee to the mountains. And again, mountains is a relative term. This isn't quite the Himalayas. But they fled, and then when the wrath of the god abates, they come back and they purify the place. When someone's sick in the palace, you purify the palace. So it's like disinfecting. So strangely enough, some research I read made the excellent point that what we kind of call magical thinking, that is to say, concepts that we think about as quote unquote archaic or outdated, like contamination, purity, actually describe infectious disease very well. So to a so-called rational person, the idea, for example, that there's a disease in the air you can't see that can make you sick, on the face of it could sound quite ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's kind of a magical thing as it is. So the ancients that we accuse, a lot of them, not accused, but that were prone to what we call magical thinking, were actually very well prepared for this because they thought of the invisible world all the time.
Excellent, thank you. And do you know, this is a question I did not send to Eli in advance, so we do not hold it against him if he can't answer it. Do you know what happened in terms of treatment?
Yeah, so this is actually interesting. I just read, there's a physician and also there's a serologist physician. That's a combination you don't hear about every day. That noted that we don't actually hear of treatment for plague in the sources. No one at Mari says, I think at Mari, we do have a letter that the Ashipu should come and treat her. The Ashipu was the exorcist. So the exorcist was the person you would deal that would come, for example, to purify. But I don't think we really know what they did. We don't have any prescriptions specifically for plague. And when you have that emissary talking about the cities being overrun, he doesn't say, please bring doctors here. Not that doctors were a public health thing in ancient Mesopotamia. Let me just see, actually. I have a... Yeah. I think the most specific they get is, as soon as the extispicy on behalf of this woman, sumudum, is negative, one should treat this woman. But they don't say exactly with what.
And the general sense I'm getting from what you're saying is, on a large scale at least, the answer is not necessarily treatment. The answer is quarantine.
Yeah, quarantine. And I'm not sure, we don't know how strictly it was enforced. The thing is, they don't provide exact numbers. So when he says there are towns that are infected, how many? How many are dying? We do have that information sometimes. We have a letter that says formally 15 or to 5 or 15 people died a day from the plague, but now no one's dying, so everything's fine. So we do have some numbers sometimes. They had this kind of dual understanding of plague. That's on the one hand, it's something religious. It's the wrath of the god. On the other hand, it's something infectious. So you have both. You can both pray, and they do, like Mosheli prays, and we'll get to that. But you can also take practical steps, like, again, really quarantining people. So then the Mesopotamians had a complicated approach to life, because on the one hand, everything bad that happens to you is because is the fault. Well, fault is a big word, but a result of the god's actions, but it doesn't mean you can't really do anything about it. You don't just accept things. You can pray to the gods. You can try to solve the problem with ritual, or actually what we would call, or we would think is closer to medicine. You don't just put your hands up and hope for the best. That's not human nature, I think.
Thank you. So that's possibly a good place to move on to Mosheli's plague prayers. What exactly are those?
Well, so Mosheli was a king in the late 14th century and early 13th century in what the Hittite kingdom, which was in today's Anatolia or in Turkey. And he had a big problem. The problem was plague. His father. So what happened? Well, according to him, is that his father, Shupiluyuma, attacked the Egyptians. Actually, the story of why he attacked the Egyptians is actually quite heartbreaking. If I remember correctly, the Egyptians, according to the Hittites, of course, the Egyptian queen wrote to the Hittites saying, "My husband has died. We require a husband.
I can't marry one of my commoners. Please send me one of your royals."
Which is very interesting, because the idea of a Hittite person becoming the Egyptian pharaoh is beyond weird. And then the Hittites are like, "Yes, of course, we'll send him. We'll send the king's eldest son." And the Egyptians were like, "Great." And then they sent him, and then they murdered him. Someone else, of course, another Egyptian party murdered him on the way. The Egyptians were understandably furious.
Yeah.
And they attacked Egypt. And very interestingly, in Mosheli's prayers, that isn't a good thing, because one would think that the Hittites would frame it as, they killed the eldest son of our king. We have full right to attack them. But they had a treaty. They were bound by oath not to attack Egypt. But they did. And according to Mosheli, when Shupiluyuma brought back prisoners from Egypt, they spread the plague to Khati. That's what he says. And then in his plagues, he wants to get to the bottom of it. But I think a good way to get at what those plagues are is to quote from them. Can I quote?
Please.
"O storm god of Khati, my lord, O gods, my lords, Mosheli, your servant, has sent me, saying," the person speaking the prayer, "Go speak to the storm god of Khati, my lord, and the god, my lords. What is this that you have done? You have allowed a plague into Khati, so that Khati has been very badly oppressed by the plague. People kept dying in the time of my father, in the time of my brother, and since I have become priest of the gods," that is to say king, "they keep on dying in my time. For 20 years now, people have been dying in Khati. Will the plague never be removed from Khati? I cannot control the worry of my heart. I can no longer control the anguish of my soul." So the basic gist is, what's going on? This isn't ending. This isn't coming to a close. It should have been over by now. And if it's not over by now, then something is deeply wrong. So he starts investigating by means of extispicy and other forms of divination, what the matter is. So they come to two conclusions. There are several plague prayers, so they sometimes say things that appear contradictory. But the major research findings are: one, it's because Shupiluyuma attacked the Egyptians, and in a real sense because he brought back Egyptian prisoners of war from what is today Lebanon, and they brought the plague to Hatti. They didn't, maybe it happened according to Moshe because the Hittites didn't perform a ritual that's connected to the Euphrates correctly. And the third thing, very interestingly, is that it might have occurred because Shupilu Yuma murdered his predecessor to come to the throne. It's interesting. The Hittites had a striking capacity for self-criticism, which is sometimes appears to be missing in other Mesopotamian sources. And
I'm just going to say that the reflection does seem more self-aware than I would expect from, say, Sargon or one of the Assyrian kings.
Yeah, though of course we have the Sin of Sargon, a text, but then again, it's not from Sargon himself. But we do have a Nashubani prayer that is another thing. But yeah, the self-reflection is quite striking, the self-awareness. And then he basically says, look, I've investigated what's going on. My father has sinned. Everyone sins, but I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever fault he has committed, we have paid restitution 20-fold in blood. Please make this stop. And not only make this stop, it's if there's some other reason that this is happening, let me know. I'm open for suggestions.
I will fix it. Just tell me what to fix.
I'm in the dark here. Like, you're killing us. And he even says, funnily enough, it's like, you're killing us and our enemies are prospering and they're attacking us. Send the plague to them. So it's not like stop the plague, let everyone be happy. No. Our enemies should get the plague. We should be fine.
We've had enough, give it to someone else.
Yes, exactly.
So do we know how long they had this plague for?
No, we do not. We only have Moshe saying it's been going on for 20 years, and we don't. That's like the plague prayers are the only mention.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. He also has a great point. The gods in the ancient world, in the ancient Near East. I'm not sure. Again, Egypt isn't my territory, so I leave this out of it. Where not as dependent on humans, and humans were dependent on gods, but they did depend on people. You see this very clearly in the Gilgamesh flood story, which we will get to, I hope. And he says basically, because you've killed so many people, everyone bringing offerings to the gods isn't coming anymore. So you're hurting yourself. Like, why are you doing this? This is against your self-interest. And that's the thing in Mesopotamia. What you say to the god when you want them to spare you is, "Leave me alive, so I will praise you." May I pray? May I in Akkadian? May I praise your? May I pronounce the prayer? May I praise you? Basically, may I praise you. And that's one of the best things a mortal can do to a god. It's like, he saved me, and
all right, I will sing his praises forever because he did not kill me.
Yes, it's like what is it? It's like someone corners you in a dark alley, and you say, "Oh, please leave me alive. I'll just tell people how great you are that you didn't murder me."
Surprisingly effective on occasion. So this is possibly a good place to move to the era epic. Yeah. We're talking about the pathology and the role of the gods. So what is the era epic, and why are we talking about it in terms of plague?
Well, because I'm obsessed with it.
You're not the only one. It's one of my favorites.
No, yeah. As anyone who knows me, I'm not a professional yet in my profession, but if anyone knows me on a collegial level can attest, I never stop talking about it, and I'm glad I still have friends. But the era epic is a poem. In Akkadian, it's called the Zamaru, which is song. We call it an epic, although these kinds of definitions, epic, this is Greek terminology. This is Aristotelian terminology. So we're not quite sure how to match ancient Mesopotamian compositions with it. But anyway, it's a poem that was ostensibly revealed to a man in a dream that documents the complete disintegration of the order of the world in Babylonia, a time of crisis so great it can almost be described as a second flood. And in it, basically, we have Era, who's a god of violence, destruction, also plague. And he's resting in his home. And he's not doing much. He's just, spending time with his wife. And he's a bit weary. How tired, how not doing anything can make you very, very tired. And then I'm simplifying. The era epic has a knack of being very complicated and sometimes self-contradicting. So the summary we're going to give is a bit of a simplification. the seven, which are basically destruction incarnate, come up to him and say, basically, you're a coward for staying home. You're staying home like this city dweller, this weak, effeminate city dweller. Again, they were quite misogynistic. Go out to battle. Battle is fun. Battle is a celebration. It's a feast. Go and everyone will adore you and, of course, be afraid of you and praise you. And they also say, basically, we're such hardened warriors, but now we've grown soft and we've forgotten everything. Era's convinced. He does want everyone to praise him. So he convinces the king of the gods, Marduk, to abandon his position as king of the gods temporarily, and then several confusing things happen. But long story short, he, in the absence of Marduk, or even after Marduk had come back, he unleashes destruction on the world. And Era has this power. Era doesn't just rain fire and brimstone from the sky. Era creates hatred. I like to think of Era as a bit of an anti-Eros. Eros makes people mad with love. Era makes people mad with aggression and hatred. So he goes into Babylon. And if you want, I know I can recite this in Akkadian, but people would be extremely bored, so no. But anyway, look, he goes into Babylon, and everyone gathered around him. He looks like a man. He becomes like a man. And he incites everyone to kill, to destroy. And then he incites the citizens of Babylon to destroy their own city. And then he goes out to the palace and poisons the minds of the soldiers to kill the citizens for whom they're responsible. So Era makes people enemies unto themselves and the people and things they love. That is his thing. He's a bit of a trickster. And then he keeps on killing and killing and killing, and it's so great and fun. But the thing is, he has, I haven't mentioned the most important person in the poem. It is not Eret, it's Ishum. He's called Alik Machrishu, that is the one who goes before him, but he's also a Maliku, an advisor. He's his advisor, a counselor, and he's trying to calm Era down. First he tells him, Era, why are you doing this? Why have you why have you planned evil towards gods and man? Plotted even, and you haven't stopped. And Era's Era basically calls him a know-nothing and tells him to shut up. And then Ishum tries a different strategy. He talks for a long time, for a very long speech, about everything terrible that Era has done. And he tells him, Ulanuka manukurtu, shalakashama tachazu, apuchati tsalati atukama utatama inalibika umaleku, which means, is there battle without you? Is there enmity apart from you? You alone are clad in the armor of strife, yet you say in your heart they hold me in contempt. So these lines can be read in two ways. Either he's saying basically, you think people are attacking you by holding you in contempt, and Era says again and again they hold him in contempt. But they're not. You're the only one who's aggressive. We would say today that he's projecting. No, I mean this quite seriously, that he is the one who's aggressive, so he thinks everyone is attacking him with scorn. Or if we don't see contempt as an aggressive act, we might say something else. The person who is the one who is held in contempt is the weak one. So Ishum could be telling him, you are the most powerful force in the universe. There is no battle without you. No one can oppose you. But despite being so powerful, you still think that people hold you in contempt. And then he goes and the Era epic is composed in almost entirely of speeches. Not almost entirely, but a lot of it is. And then basically tells him how he killed everyone. And then he says, you killed the one who sinned against you and you one who did not, and the good man and the bad man and everyone. You killed everyone, seriously. The Mesopotamians were big on exaggeration and hyperbole, so it's not quite everyone. But then he says again, and you found no rest whatsoever, and you still said in your heart, they hold me in contempt. So we have this thing, I would say, was deluded. I think the text is saying that he's deluded. That basically, despite being so powerful, so violent, so obviously enormously powerful, that he still thinks people are holding him in contempt because he's got a massive inferiority complex. We would say that. Again, these are anachronisms to a large extent. The Mesopotamians, let's put it this way, the Mesopotamians weren't as judgmental towards what we would call inflated egos and self-praise. So we're kind of big on that. So if you read anything by the Assyrian kings, they were very big on praising themselves. And they obviously didn't think of it as a bad thing.
So what happens at the end of the epic?
Oh, okay. So Ishum's speech works. Era's convinced. He rests. In my reading, he's convinced. It's like, oh yeah, everyone loves me and fears me. Okay, cool. I've got what I wanted. So he doesn't quite get his just desserts here. He kind of wins. And then all the gods gather before him. And Era says something interesting. He says, my heart was, so he says, maybe, and the word, it's also be translated as indeed. In my opinion, it's maybe. Perhaps, in the same meaning that you would say perhaps in English to deflect. Perhaps I intended evil in a form of mistake. My heart was angry and my heart was angry and I laid waste to the people. And then he says that he uses similes like one who never planted an orchard or doesn't plant an orchard, I don't hesitate to cut it down. Like one who, basically, the simile is like a hireling shepherd, basically someone who isn't really who doesn't have any attachment to the flock he's shepherding. Do I have enough light, by the way? Okay.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Yeah, so like a hireling shepherd, I took the lead ram from the flock, basically saying, I have no attachment to anything. I just destroy. I'm not a creator god. I don't nourish. I don't nurture. That's just who I am. That's how Andrew George reads it, and I tend to agree with him. And then he says, one cannot snatch a corpse from the, one does not, or a carcass from the mouth of a savage lion. And when one is in a frenzy, another cannot counsel him. So he says, basically, I was out of my mind.
It's not my fault.
It's not my fault. It's a bit of an insanity defense. It's a bit more complicated, and I hope to get to that some point. I have a dissertation to write, but which hopefully will get written one day. But the thing is that he kind of deflects, or maybe he says that's just the way I am. Maybe he's kind of apologizing. Maybe it's a moment of self-awareness. It's poetry. So
yeah.
And then after that, two things happen. One, the epic is revealed to a guy called Kapti Ilani Marduk in a dream. And the very frustrating thing is, we're not sure which god it was who revealed it to him. The passage where that happens is written in a way so the lines are complete. That's not the problem. That just there's a massive confusion. It's like they don't say the names of who revealed it. They say he revealed it. And they also, it might be Era, it might be Ishum. I've had arguments both ways. It might be someone else, but I don't think it's another god. I think it should be one of them. And Kapti Ilani Marduk hears the whole epic in a dream. It is revealed to him. Literally, they made him see it. And then he wakes up and recites the whole thing, which means, by the way, that he recites about himself getting the recitation, which is kind of meta, I think. It's in the epic. Or maybe that's added, but never mind. And then Era hears for the epic for the first time because Ishum revealed it, or he hears that he didn't miss anything, that Kapti Ilani Marduk, again, I'm doing the he, so that Kapti Ilani Marduk didn't miss anything in his recitation. He's absolutely delighted and he blesses the epic. And the epic has a sort of godlike power. It is more than holy. He says, in the sanctuary of the god who honors it, that is to say, not me. He doesn't say the epic, he says the song. May abundance accumulate, but may the god who disdains it not smell incense. And then also people, may the king who glorifies my name rule the world, and may the prince who honors this poem have no rival. And when a god says may, it means it will happen. It's not just a wish. He has the power to make this happen. And then it's not only if you're a king that it's good for you. If you're a singer, the singer who sings it will not die in a plague. for example. So you can also, my singing voice is horrible, but I can start.
You could recite it though. I think that probably counts.
I think so, but I think it's not enough. I think that I think you really do need to sing it. But and the way for reciting is dababu, to speak. This is sarahu, which is to even lament. And he says the scribe who masters it will be honored in his own, will be spared in an enemy land and honored in his own. So basically, it's interesting because there's this image of the scholar as a traveler.
Mm-hmm.
Which we do have in the ancient world. You know, we did have the Babylonian scholars and the Assyrian royal household, of course, were Babylonian scholars all over the place. So basically saying, oh, scholar, this is your amulet against being killed in a foreign court because you ran afoul of the king. And basically, it's even good if you have this in your house. In the house in which this tablet is placed, even if Era is angry in the seven, even if Era be angry in the seven, be murderous in the subjunctive that no one ever uses in English. The sword of judgment, or again, plague. I think it's judgment. I've read convincing arguments why it's the case. The sword of judgment will not approach it. Peace resides in it or abides upon it. So basically, even a tablet with the text on it is good. It can save your life.
Mm-hmm.
It can save you from destruction. Even if Era, is on the warpath again, this is fine. So this thing is basically a panacea against worldly distress.
And something that, one of the things that I love one of the reasons why I love the Era epic so much is we actually have these amulets.
Yeah.
And I have.
Yes.
Here's one I prepared earlier.
Aha! Yes.
This was the wonderful Jeremiah Peterson, who is Ancient Text Modern Scribe or Modern Tablet. Modern Tablet. On Etsy, yes. Go check out his work because it is beautiful.
It is amazing.
We have another one in the back here.
I have two works of his on my left.
Beautiful. Yes. Beautiful. But so, yes, this is actually inscribed with a section of the Era epic.
Yes, this is from the end of Tablet 3, in which Ishum praises Era. Basically, you control the lands and everyone loves you. Please stop killing people. Well, love is a big word. Fear you. Everyone fears you. Obeys you. Praises you. And I think one actually bit of ancient Mesopotamian poetry that I think modern people could quite identify with is from a composition called Ludl, which is fittingly I will praise. I will praise a lot of wisdom. It's by a guy who's suffering and he doesn't know why he's suffering. And he has this moment of what we would call an existential crisis. And he basically says, who can understand what the gods are doing? Like, I do something because the whole Mesopotamian conception of life was about sin and punishment. Mm-hmm. So you were like, it's the book of Job. You can you hear me? Oh yeah. So if you're good, the gods will like you. If you're bad, they will punish you. But they look at the world and it's not quite what's going on, evidently. So it says, what's good to me is bad to them. What's bad to them is good to me. And then he goes into this thing about the impermanence of the human condition. It's like, he who lived by might died in distress. 1 second, a person is full, exultant, full of enthusiasm. And then he is anxious, actually, the other way around. First he's anxious, then he's full of activity. 1 moment, a person sings in exultation. The next he groans like a professional mourner. There's this lovely translation by Benjamin Foster. Their destiny changes in the blink of an eye. It's not by him. His translation is the best. This is not by him. Their destinies change in the blink of an eye. What the gods intend for them changes in the blink of an eye. And then the last two, when they're starving, they become like corpses. When they are sated, they rival their gods. In good times, they think that they speak of going up to heaven, and in bad times, they complain that they're going down to the netherworld, to hell. So it's about this thing about humans that whenever something bad happens to us, we think it's always going to be this way. Whenever something good happens to us, we think it's always going to be this way. So we're going up to heaven or going down to the netherworld. But in fact, human life is all about impermanence, and what the gods intend for us changes all the time in the blink of an eye, literally. So the gods are very capricious. or we would say indecisive, but they change their mind. And that can be a very hopeful, can be a very frightening thing, because whatever happiness you have can slip through your fingers. But it can also be a very hopeful message. And in the end, Ludl is a very hopeful composition, because basically, not always, people die, of course, but a lot of the time when we're in a very bad place, it doesn't mean that it will always be this way. It's maybe, most likely, it won't. I like this passage whenever I'm having a hard time. I think about it.
It definitely helps to remember that these things are not permanent.
Yeah, it doesn't help much in the thick of it.
No.
I'm not pretending that I'm saying something that will, it's like, it's like those truisms, everything ends. Okay. If you internalize it, then maybe, but we're in the middle of a pandemic, and no ancient Mesopotamian text will suddenly make it easy.
No, but I gain some, maybe not comfort, but solidarity maybe in knowing that this is something that people before me have dealt with, people after me will deal with also, and we will get through it. We just have
at some point, 10 years. I don't
keep
know.
Going. But, don't say 10 years.
I'm sorry. Mushili had this thing for 20 years. No,
that's true. That is true.
Yeah, and
Mushili didn't have the internet, so
no. Oh, that's wrong. What did they do in quarantine all day?
No Netflix.
That must have been terrible. How didn't they murder each other? But I think that there's a Hebrew expression that means the trouble of many is half solace. So I don't think it's half solace. I don't think it cuts the suffering by half. I think it's like 9/10. No, 1/10 of solace. So it makes it a little better. That is part of the human condition. A lot of the time, this is a very banal observation that people have been making all the time in this pandemic, but we see ourselves as disconnected from the ancient world, as a new chapter of history that doesn't deal with the same problems, but the same problems come back.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Thank you. We had a question a little while ago, and I say this to all our guests: if you can't answer it, say I don't know. That's absolutely fine. Everyone is very used to me telling them that I don't know the answers to things. So did Eli look into the letters from Atusha about the sea people and the plague that ravaged the most advanced civilization at the time?
Yeah. So about that, the Bronze Age collapse, there's this great gap between how monumental the event is and the fact that we, at the end of the day, don't have that many sources. So we have these letters, there's plague, there's hunger. We do know about that. We do have those letters from Ugarit about the sea peoples coming and,
destroying everything.
Yeah, and they thought that the soldiers of Ugarit, the army of Ugarit is in Khati, and the king of Ugarit doesn't know what to do. And we do know that a lot of sites get abandoned in the Western Levant. So, in what is basically in modern day in Canaan and stuff. And we do have the Arameans cause chaos in Mesopotamia. We have some laconic entries in chronicles about that, and some kings are fighting them. But compared to the fascination it has garnered, we don't actually know that much. We have the sources from Ugarit. We, of course, have the Egyptian sources about Ramesses III fighting the sea people. But if you put all of these sources together in a PDF, I'm not sure if they would fill more than 10 pages. So that's the job of the modern historian, to make as many books as possible out of 10 pages. And a lot of archaeology. It's become a meme at this point, the Bronze Age collapse. Everyone knows about it.
Yeah.
And I love that there's these wonderful meme pages about the ancient world, and they have a lot of memes about that. I don't know, to answer the question, I don't know the role of plague, but the thing is, I don't know if anyone really knows. We know there was famine, we know there was plague, but the relative importance of factors, was it climate change? Was it famine? Was it plague? Was it the sea people? Was it internal collapse? Was it the Chabiru? Was it economics? Probably all of them.
We had Dr. Eric Klein on. For those who did not catch the interview, it was actually very enjoyable. But a few a month or two ago to talk about this exact thing, and he said that in his opinion, and he's researched and written an awful lot about it, in his opinion, all of the factors play into it, but if he had to choose one, it would be climate change.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Very topical. They just had one of my former teachers, Sal Finkelstein, the Israeli, very good Israeli archaeologist, a great Israeli archaeologist, conducted research with other people into sediments from the Dead Sea to look at climate change. To just go back about plague, the Mesopotamians for the Mesopotamians conceptualized overpopulation as a danger, not because it's a danger in itself, but because the gods hate it. The gods need to sleep. Sleep and sleepiness and wakefulness are very important in Mesopotamian thought, to the extent that the world was created because Tiamat wanted to kill her children because of the noise they were making, which is relatable to any parent. So the gods, after the flood, it was suggested by the god Ea, the god of wisdom and sweet water, to Enlil, the king of the gods who brought about the flood, that instead of obliterating humanity, they could reduce it. And one of the things that could happen is that Era could come up and massacre it, and that could be a reference to plague. Also in Atrahasis, which is kind of an earlier version of the flood story, among other things, before the flood happens, the gods try to reduce the population a bit. So they send a plague, and then Atrahasis himself, that's the name for a person, it means super smart, and he goes to Ea and asks him, what should I do? And Ea says, okay, stop reverencing all the gods except Namtar, which is, by the way, when you see this, hello, John, I know you like this. Never mind, I have one of my colleagues is writing a dissertation about Namtar. So he's kind of death personified. And he says, basically, go and reverence him, bring him offerings, and then he'll like it and it'll stop. And that's what happens. Ironically, though, because these half measures don't work, they bring about the flood. So kind of ironically, Ea, the savior of humanity, actually inadvertently leads to his destruction here. And there are even Mesopotamian sources that imply that death doesn't exist before the flood, so they instituted a span of human life after it. I might be misremembering. By the way, this is the Ludl.
That's beautiful.
Again, by the great Jeremiah Peterson. It's very nice. Though I think Jeremiah Peterson, his favorite script might be early second millennium. And this, this is my favorite script, which is Neo-Assyrian, but that doesn't matter much.
I did, if I can remember my thought process. Yes. No, I wanted to ask you, you're obviously very passionate about the Era epic. What exactly draws you to it so much?
Well, I think it's so alive. It has a vividness that's sometimes hard to find in Mesopotamian literature. It's also it's not cynical, but I think Andrew, again, this is going back to an argument kind of that Andrew George made. When you read Mesopotamian descriptions of violence a lot of the time, the classic ones are in Assyrian war inscriptions. It's all self-righteous and it's all simplistic. And I think Enuma Elish is also very simplistic in a way. It's great, but I mean, at the end, it's a male, it's, big man hit evil woman with wind
big
or
stick,
stick, or other things according to Assyrian commentaries. But the thing is that in the Era epic, there are these lines to this, like when the general incites his population to the city to which I'm sending you, you man, fear no god, respect no man, do young and old alike to death, do not spare even the babe unweaned. So it's very alive, it's very exciting, it's very complicated, and it's very universal, and it's about madness. And I really like. I think you had the wonderful Assyriologist who talks about mental health.
Moody Al-Rashid.
Yeah, Moody Al-Rashid. It's early in the morning for me. Moody, I'm sorry. You're lovely. I'm sorry. Yeah. So she talks about she's approaching the topic of mental health in Mesopotamia from the medical angle. She has written an excellent dissertation about it. And I want to approach it in my dissertation a bit more from the literary angle.
Mm-hmm.
So it is about delusion, and delusion is a great subject to write about. Delusion is a great, is fun because as the audience, something that a character doesn't, or you see that they don't know, and that's very engaging. And it also has a universality to it, because political leaders have a tendency sometimes to seek affirmation, to have their egos be a bit inflated, to maybe see the world in a bit of a skewed way, even good political leaders. And the era, I think, speaks to that. Well, there is speaking truth to power, but this is truth about power.
Yeah.
And I think that is, I think that's what kind of what makes it engaging for a modernist, and what makes it engaging for me. I don't think it's just beautiful. It's kind of, it would take a while to talk about why, but I just love reading. Every time I read it, it strikes me in new ways. And even though it's really short, it is very short. It's like 700 lines originally. We don't know exactly how many, but like a single book of the Iliad can be more than 1,000 lines. And the Iliad is 24 books. So I think it's incredible how complicated it manages to be in a few hundred lines.
And I don't know how far you are along in your PhD dissertation process. Are you purely looking at era, or are you bringing other things in?
So I want to look at era. I also want to look at the Mesopotamia. I mean, again, this is so preliminary because I'm just writing my prospectus right now. But I also want to look at the Mesopotamian conceptions of the heart. What's really interesting in Mesopotamia is that the heart has a life of its own from a very early period. So the heart can lie to you. That's a medical symptom. If the heart speaks foolishness or nonsense to its owner, presumably. It can request things of you. Era's heart wants him to go to battle. It can... Sorry, I blanked out for a second.
No, don't worry.
The heart can... also, when you desire something in Mesopotamia, they say that your heart carries you to it. And Gilgamesh, for example, is carried by his heart. They literally tell him, Gilgamesh, you are young, your heart carries you, that is to say, away. Whatever you do, you don't know it. So the heart, or the emotions, again, the word for heart in Akkadian can mean many, many different things. But it seems to me that the heart as a center of emotional as opposed to cerebral decision-making, it has a very prominent role. And the weirdest thing is that when you do things to other people, you can say that your heart did it. From Gudea on, 2200 BC, it says that the heart of the god destroys his enemies. But again, it can't literally be the case. It's not that the heart leaves the god's body. It's that, in my reading, it's because the god is acting from the heart. He's being emotional. And I think that's also strikes the truth about the human experience, that sometimes emotions are what happens to you rather than what you are. They're almost experienced like something external. They're just another environment. They're not totally you. In the same way that a person with mental illness might experience their illness as something that is not totally them. Something that happened, in a way, it's not them. So I'm going to look at that and how it relates to Era, and I'm going to look a bit at the comparison between Era and Gilgamesh, because I think Era hasn't been incorporated enough into the wider study of Mesopotamian literature. Because Era is kind of its own thing, and like everyone knows Gilgamesh and Anzu and Enuma Elish, and for some reason there's this...
Not so much Era.
There's this amazing book by Selena Wisnam, a British Syriologist and a really nice person, very kind, and it's called Weapons of Words. I think intertextuality in ancient Akkadian literature. I'm messing up the subtitle at the subheading. But generally, it's about how different Mesopotamian compositions kind of argue with each other or engage in polemics through intertextuality. And that incorporates Era very well. But I think there is more to say about what unites and what separates Era from epics like Gilgamesh. and I want to look about that. I call these epics of the mind because a very central thing in them is the mental state and the journey, the mental journey. Journey is a very Gen Z word, one might say, but the mental journey that the protagonist undergoes, and I think it's interesting.
That sounds very interesting. Thank you. We actually, so I have no more questions, and the audience has no more questions. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on?
Well, let me think. I think there's this. I think that we talked about letters. So there are letters to the Syrian king Esarhaddon, Ashurafi Dina, and there's this great letter by a doctor or a scholar, and he writes to Esarhaddon, "You said to me, why can't, that is to say the doctor, why can't you diagnose the nature of my illness?" And then the scholar says, "Oh, the king's illness is very complicated when we don't know." And Esarhaddon is this great tragic figure because to judge by the letters, the reality might have been different. Our sources might tell a very skewed story. He's the king. He's the most powerful man in Western Asia, and he lives by death. He kills people, like a lot, and robs them. But he's shut up in his palace, not eating. The guy who's robbing whole countries of the resources refuses to eat. That's very ironic. No, but I think that even goes to show, like mostly, that everyone's vulnerable. In a way, no one's safe. And I think that's also the message of the Era epic. Before plague and also before Era, it doesn't help if you are righteous. It doesn't help if you fear the gods. It lays low. The Sumerians would say it didn't know good and evil. It's a force of nature. It has no morality. It destroys everyone. And it's kind of out to an extent. I mean, there are, of course, things people can do. But to an extent, it's out of their hands. And I think modern positivist 19th century kind of thought that's all about man is in charge of his own destiny doesn't fit all the way here. I think the ancient world in this case had it right. They called it the gods, we call it COVID, but sometimes I think that they're kind of bigger than us and we don't know how to deal with them. And it's really hard.
Thank you. And we do have one final question. Scott would like to know, where could he find a good translation of this epic?
Okay, so a great translation, and I think, there are two in English. One by Benjamin Foster, who I'm proud to say is one of my professors here at Yale. So great translator, and it's in his volume Before the Muses. And it's really nice. I really suggest reading it. There's also another good one by Stephanie Daly in a book called Myths from Ancient Mesopotamia. Just to quote quickly, for those who can read French, there's a really nice translation by an Assyriologist called Jean Bottero. There's also a German one, Italian one. There is no, my mother tongue is Hebrew, and there is no Hebrew one, but I'm working on that. I would definitely suggest Benjamin Foster's version in Before the Muses. I think it's great.
And I've put a link to both Benjamin Foster and I'm just getting Stephanie Daly's link now in the chat if you are interested. Both excellent books. Before the Muses is slightly more expensive, but it is like this thick.
Yeah, you get a lot for your money, yes.
You really, really do. And if you just want kind of a small or smaller introductory volume on Mesopotamian mythology, then Stephanie Daly's is good. We have a message for you in French. Thank you for the recommendation.
Merci. I can't really speak French, but I am required to be able to read it at a passable level. I guess I'll also do the German. Actually, I don't know the news translation in German. I do have one. There's one in Italian by a guy called Cagni. Actually, the main edition of Era is by a guy called Luigi Cagni, who was a priest, actually. But yeah, the French translation is actually excellent. I really like it. It's very readable and it's very clear. and it's I really like Jean Botteroy was a great cook as well.
Really, I didn't know that. I love his writing. I love his writing. I didn't know he cooked though.
He's very, very good. And there's some. If someone wants recommendations for secondary literature, I'm available. I mean, my email is on my Yale page. So if you need any recommendations, the secondary literature about ERA isn't that big yet, but there are some really nice things. There have been very nice things written about it. I'm totally in. I can do So there's stuff to read.
Wonderful. So if you are interested in further reading for the ERA epic, you can contact Eli through his Yale page on the website. So I think we will end there. We've been going for just about an hour. Eli, thank you so much. This was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Okay. Everybody, thank you for joining us. And until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that? Digital Hammurabi is made possible by generous sponsorship from our patrons. Their support means that we have the technological and academic resources necessary to bring the ancient world directly to you. If you want to join the team, go to patreon.com/Digital Hammurabi to see how you can help. If you want to join the team, go to Patreon.